Hello, everybody, and welcome to the NextGen Planners podcast. My name is Dan, and I'm the head of community here at NextGen Planners. And today, I am very happy to be joined on this very, very gloomy end of November UK day by the wonderful ray of sunshine, Dominika Sieradzka-MacCuirc. How are you doing today, Dominika?
Great, thanks, Danny. It's really nice to be described as a ray of sunshine. It's a gloomy day indeed,
Yes.
but it happens to be the 11th month for my daughter, which means that we are on countdown now, not to Christmas, but to her
Oh, yeah.
first birthday, which is, very exciting.
Yeah.
So today it was a nice day to begin with that.
That's good. That's a very millennial thing, isn't it, to count the 11th month as something significant. But yeah, nearly a month to go until her birthday. Let's celebrate that. Yeah, it is actually a
Exactly.
month until Christmas as well. Really good. So, for anyone who doesn't know Domi, I don't know how if you work in the financial planning profession, but she's a business and operations consultant, and she's also the founder of RIE Solutions. And RIE, by the way, means, well, it stands for Resolve, Implement, Enjoy. That's correct, isn't it,
Excellent.
Dummy? Look at that. See, I've
It
done my
is.
research.
I'm very impressed, Dan.
This isn't my first rodeo. I've done this before. So to kick things off, Dommy, what we like to do is we just like to hear from our guests what they get up to every day. So can you just tell us a little bit about what it is that you do every single day?
Sure. So, in short, hopefully, I'm helping businesses to run truly great companies by working with both practice managers and business owners. But in practical terms, every day is a little bit different and it's really exciting because, as everything in practice management, there is a real variety to the role of a practice manager, to what happens on the side of running a successful practice. And therefore, my days vary too because the challenges vary so much. So I run a Master Practitioners Club as one of the services that we offer, where I provide support, best practice, and mentorship to practice managers and operations directors. And it's brilliant because every day, as I say, is different. Yesterday, we were chatting about retention periods and things related to data deletion. This morning, I was dealing with things related to examples of what could you do with work experience for someone who is 18 coming to stay with you for a week. And then this morning, I was working with one of the business owners on actually defining how the role of a practice manager could look in their business and where the division of role and responsibility lies between business owner and the practice manager. And then later today, I will be working with another business on the service propositions. So it's really, really broad, and
Broad.
it entails all things practice management.
That's amazing. Very varied day, which sounds exciting. That's good. We'll come on to the topic of practice management later on in the podcast. I will just say, by the way, that I've been in a session with the Master Practitioners Club, and I can vouch for them all being very, very lovely people. Very welcoming, very warm. So, if anyone who's listening to this, go and check it out. They're a really cool group. But one of the things that I really want to kind of talk to you about today is something that I think financial planning firms are pretty good at. The majority of them are pretty good at it. I mean, there's always room for improvement in this area, and that area is systems and processes. Well, not so much systems, but certainly processes and implementing those processes. So, I guess I'll just be kind of blunt with this, but why do you I mean, clearly you do think this, but why do you think it's so important for financial planning firms to have really super duper clear processes in their firms?
Well, look, I think that it's important for any firm to have really great processes. So it
Mm.
doesn't really matter what industry or profession you're working in. Pretty much anything that we do in life involves some form of a sequence of actions or a sequence of events. So even though we tend to think of processes something in isolation, we're involved in a process constantly, every day in making our cup of tea, in brushing our teeth. It's a process. The thing about a good process, and process that is formalized, process that is written, process that is followed by everyone, is that you are ensuring a consistency of an outcome.
Mm,
So, if you think about cooking, the idea of having a cooking recipe is so that you don't end up with a dish that is absolutely fantastic with not having enough salt or having too much salt. And the process is exactly the same. It just allows you to create a consistent outcome for clients. It allows the team to know exactly what needs to happen, when, and how. It makes everyone's life much easier and reduces the risk of things going wrong.
mm,
So as far as I see it, process or having a process in place is really the only way in which I can do very basic things, such as make sure that my business is compliant, make sure that my team knows what they need to be doing. If there is an issue with someone's performance, the only way that I can really be addressing it is if we all know what's meant to be happening in the first instance. Otherwise, it's all just completely haphazard. And what does good look like? Who knows?
mhm.
And even when we're following a recipe, we all know that we can be baking the same thing 5 times. Not necessarily doesn't come out exactly the same every single time, and certain people have a special touch, and it seems to just work completely differently. In the same way, people's personal touch will always come through in a process, and there will be slight variation. There will be slight variation in the final product that you are seeing, but there is this scalability and consistency to it that you haven't got otherwise. So,
Mhm.
I'd say that it's just a foundation for any business if you want to run a good outfit.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly kind of, it's certainly um more popular. Well, not more popular, but more, I would say, more focused on in our profession because of the responsibility that is laid on the financial planner's shoulders,
Yep.
and the cost of something not being done or a process not being followed in a financial planning business is you know a, a lot more risky than some other businesses. I think that would be fair to say, given how regulated and stuff we are. I guess for anyone who's listening to this, and this is a bit of an off the cuff question, but I'm just curious. We've heard from people in the past of how to get started with this kind of stuff, because that's one of the biggest things with it is someone maybe sitting here listening to this and they've got processes which they feel like are all over the place. They don't really have a process. So where do they start? Because I've seen lots of things recommended, but how do you recommend that people get started if they want to actually formalize the processes in their financial planning business?
So I've got actually a document which I'm very happy to share if we can somehow share it with the audience, of something called process prep sheet. It was originally created for people thinking about looking at mapping of their annual review processes, but it can be applied to absolutely any process in the business. And it just asks some very basic questions for you to consider as you are thinking of approaching the exercise of, putting processes in place. But in short, some of the things that I would be suggesting that you do is actually, it's even pre-deciding what process we're looking at, is just thinking, right, in relation to that specific process, what are the outcomes that I want? Because that's often something that gets completely skipped.
Yeah.
But that can be very important when decision making about detailed parts of your process. So, for example, if I want to be driven by client outcomes and taking a client centric approach, versus one of my objectives perhaps being as streamlined as possible or as automated as possible. It might be that I will come up against scenarios when looking at my process where I'm going, there was a trade-off here to be made. I can either be really client-centric by doing this really cool thing, but that will mean that actually it's quite a manual thing that I need to introduce here.
Yeah.
So it's really good to be clear about what are my objectives? What is it that I'm really trying to do here? And then asking very simple questions. Why am I doing what am I doing? who is doing this specific task? What does the task entails? What tools do we need to complete the tasks? When does it need to be completed? So what are the timeframes? So I've got 5 very simple questions that you are asking over and over again in relation to every step that you are undertaking of actually, these are the questions that I need to answer in order to get that right. And really thinking, people have this tendency of thinking about processes in relation to what they do right now, which may not be optimal. So it's really important to take a step back and not go, oh, the fact that James is doing this specific task right now doesn't necessarily mean that this is the best way of operating. So if we were starting to met tomorrow a brand new business, how would it work?
Yeah.
Because I think that again, it's so easy to get caught up in what happens today, and that really sort of prevents you from thinking what's optimal.
Yeah.
So these are the 3 things that I would be starting with.
It's really good. I think as well, just kind of piggybacking onto that point, and I can't believe I'm going to even say this because it's such a cliche line, but it's so true. Of like, we often get caught up like working in the business rather than necessarily on the business. And something that I really believe in is that if you want to look at this kind of stuff, you almost need to take yourself away from the business. So things like away days with your team, or even just going away from the usual place of work where you usually, that just takes you out of that mindset, because everyone has always got task lists which are just ridiculously long. And to do something like this, what you're talking about there, to kind of do an analysis of how it currently is and how you want it to be in the future, you need to take yourself out of how it is now, because you get so lost in the today that you cannot possibly think of what it should look like tomorrow. And I think that kind of ties into what you were just saying there.
Absolutely. Look, it's so easy to get caught up in day-to-day stuff and never actually do the things that are going to that are going to have an impact on your business.
Mhm.
Because it's very, yeah, as I say, easy to get caught up with daily client work, with different emergencies that are coming through. And these things are important to address, but they are not the things that are going to drive the change and transform your business in the way in which you operate. So
No.
making time for business planning days, making plan for quarterly reviews, making plans for operational forums, all of these are absolutely critical to making this a success.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's have a chat about practice management then, because I came into financial planning, I think, well, it was just over 5 years now. And since then, I mean, it's become noticeably more popular, the idea of a practice manager. Even 5 years ago, it was kind of a new term, whereas I feel like now it's definitely starting to grow into something which is, an impressive thing, and lots of firms are looking at the idea of it. But I guess it would just be useful for the audience if we just kind of clarify what a practice manager is and the kind of things that we should be looking for in a practice manager. If you could think of the ideal practice manager who was sat in front of you, maybe what would that be? What would the kind of qualities and things would they have?
Sure. So first of all, I'm just so pleased to hear that you feel that you're noticing this increase in number of
Mm,
practice managers that are out there. Back in 2006, when I was a practice manager of a business where I was a partner, this wasn't even a thing.
yeah,
I can think of perhaps one other person that had similar role to myself, and it just wasn't really on the radar. Yet it's such a critical role. So I've spent most of my career trying to promote the
mhm,
reasons why having a practice manager is so important. And that is going to sort of tie in, I think, really nicely with some of the qualities and experience and skills that are critical for a practice manager to have. Is that typically financial planners go into establishing a financial planning practice because they love financial planning and they love advising clients. So they open a business. But very seldom do they open the business because they are thinking, right, strategically, this is the type of the business that I want to run. I have experience of, developing and growing firms. I have experience of managing and growing teams. I have experience of training, of mentorship. It just isn't the thing. So usually in the initial years of a relatively small practice, the business owners are typically quite absorbed with client work. And your comment about, working in the business rather than on the business, typically everything happens in the business and we just haven't got the capacity to be thinking strategically about things, to be developing the team strategically, and to be developing the business strategically. So the role of a practice manager is there to be like a glue for the business. And it's a hugely versatile role, especially for smaller firms. When I say smaller, I mean somewhere between 5 to 25 employees. That's not advisors. In a business of that size, typically the practice manager really does whole variety of different roles. So technology will be assigned to them, human resources will be assigned to them, day-to-day compliance will be assigned to them, leadership will be assigned to them. There is just finance, they might be overseeing some of the marketing. So you really need to be an all-rounder and someone who thrives on a variety in order to thrive in that role. It's also a role where you're managing up, so you're managing the business owners, their expectations, their ideas. And the role of an entrepreneur, of the business owner, the visionary, is to come up with lots of ideas. But the role of a practice manager is to then filter it down and say, look, this isn't a great idea right now for these reasons. So, they need to be able and comfortable with challenging and saying no when that's needed, and then embracing ideas when this is an appropriate thing to do. So, another communication, people skills are absolutely critical. And one of the skills that typically I'd say are lacking in smaller businesses would be team management and team development skills. So that is, again, typically something that I would be saying that is important for a business when hiring a practice manager to really think about and consider. If they've got additional skills related to coaching or effective communication, that's really, really fantastic. You need to be thinking whether this person is going to be taking, or what level of responsibility they will be taking in relation to compliance or finance. But a lot of experience can be gained over time. So I never am overly concerned about the experience, more about what skills and qualities someone has, and are they passionate and enthusiastic about that role. And I'd say that the really a critical component is you need to be enthusiastic about working with people and helping to grow people, delegate, create new leaders within the business. Otherwise, it's going to become a hindrance sooner or later.
Yeah. It's definitely not an easy role. I think because it is, I mean, like you mentioned before, you kind of have to have a varied, not experience, but varied knowledge of pretty much every department of the business. Now that covers all sorts of different things. I think probably the most difficult one that I can see is the managing up part. So, I mean, good financial planning firms have a kind of flat structure, really, rather than kind of seeing as a hierarchy. But not every financial planning firm does have that. And as a result, if you're coming in as a practice manager and telling someone whose business it is that they're not doing something right, or that you need to challenge it, that's extremely uncomfortable. And, I don't think that's going to come overnight, is it? I think it's a kind of gradual thing of being able to be comfortable enough to do that. And then also, I completely agree with your point on managing people as well. I think that is a skill, a very, very defined skill in itself. I don't think that's something that is, natural to everyone as well. So, but it's a great role, and I can certainly see why it has grown so much, because all the things you mentioned there sound absolutely crucial to a business.
Yeah, and indeed, one of the reasons for creating the Master Practitioners Club is that is the only role where you're sort of like a middle person. You are in between the team and the business owner, and there are different challenges to any other role within the business, and not necessarily a platform where you can chat internally through every issue that arises. Hence, we've created an opportunity for individuals in that role to speak to one another and share some of the challenges that they are coming up against.
Yeah.
The relationship between business owner and practice manager, has to be founded in trust. And um, often, when you are first establishing this as a new role within the business, trust, comes over time. So that is needed. But also, if you've never had someone in that role, it takes a bit of time before you really understand what that role entails, and as a business owner have the ability to really let go and trust that the person is going to do the things in the way that you would want them to be done. So it's a definite learning curve, for everyone, everyone involved. But it's a fantastic role for anyone who likes that sort of variety. And even though you're overseeing lots of different business areas, you don't need to be an expert in every single one of them.
No.
All you need to do is just make sure that you're coordinating it and that it is working smoothly. And whole point of being a fantastic person with people skills is that then you can work with your team who are experts on the topics that you're not, on the external perhaps consultants or outsourced businesses, on optimizing that so that you're using their expertise to ensure that the business is working to its optimum.
Yeah. It's difficult with that part, the end part of what you were saying there as well, because it's kind of, people are not always rational. I think human beings are pretty much irrational a lot of the time, and I think that's where, so in theory it should be a very simple thing, managing a team. But people are just so irrational. They do weird things, and dealing with that weirdness is something which is definitely a trait of a good practice manager, because it can be so easy to just say, I don't know why you're acting like this. Why are you acting like this? But we just don't understand everyone's stories. People are just irrational a lot of the time, and that is one of the most crucial parts of it, definitely. And the good practice managers I've seen have a very, very distinct way of dealing with that. And that kind of brings me on as well to thinking of the kind of the evidence part of this. So I don't know how many firms you've worked with. I don't think you'll have a defined number, but you'll certainly have an idea of how many that is. But from all of those firms that you've worked with, the ones who have practice managers versus the ones who don't, what difference do you see in those firms? Like, is there a difference? And what, if there is, what difference do you see?
So, strategically, I made a decision in 2018 that I wasn't going to work with firms that either didn't have a practice manager or weren't looking to hire one.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for making that decision, and I've been consulting since 2009. So I've been in the profession since 2003. I've been consulting since 2009. And what I've noticed was that despite sort of, or regardless of the appetite for change, the willingness to put in the work that the businesses had, and my availability externally to them, every time we were working, for example, on a review of the client's journey from the process perspective, and review the annual review process, etc., and technology and everything else. On any project like that, because I wasn't there, every day to see things through, to monitor, to assist, to ensure that implementation is happening and that monitoring is there, sooner or later they would hit a stumbling block when there wasn't a practice manager in place.
Yeah.
The whole thing of working in the business, they all have, their priority is client related work. For financial planner, the priority is client related work. For an administrator, the same. For power planner, the same. For client relationship manager, the same. Whereas the priority of the practice manager is to ensure that the practice is running smoothly. So of course, part of that is that it has to be client centric and it needs to be delivering an outstanding client experience. But their job is to be working on the business.
Yeah.
So because I used to think, oh, it's fine, we can always do things externally and we'll get through it, and we did. The difference was that sometimes we would need to pause the project for 6 months, that things were not going as smoothly, the implementation wasn't as smooth as I'd like it to be because there wasn't that support person there every single day. So I've made the decision strategically that the best outcomes were achieved by the firms that had that person on the in-house that was there working on the business all the time, and that I was much better supporting that person in transforming the business, in making the change happen, and providing them with tools, with resources, with mentorship to make all of that run smoothly than it was to be, consulting to the firms that didn't have that individual. So as far as I'm concerned, there was a huge difference. And now I've worked, it's a great question, Dan, and I would really need to dig into my data as to how many firms I've worked with over the years, but it's definitely over 100, might be closer to 150 that I've taken through major transition projects.
Yeah.
And transformations of the business. And I can say with all confidence that there is just no comparison, and it comes down to capacity.
Yeah. And is that capacity of everything? So as in for revenue, as in like you've got more capacity to take on clients, or is it capacity in terms of the employees have more, they feel less pressurized? When you mention capacity in that context, what does that mean?
So actually, I think that it means lots of different things, but two that I will pick up on are, number one, capacity for working on the business. So typically when we run capacity calculations with business owners, they haven't got any.
Yeah.
So the time that they can spend thinking about the business, is quite minimal. But then implementing the ideas that they have, they just haven't got the capacity for it. And now the best idea, badly implemented, fails. So the idea is that the practice manager, has the capacity to work on the business. So that's number one. Number two, which I think is an interesting one, is capacity for change. So, we are typically creatures that love routine and predictability and just knowing what happens, and therefore any form of change just slightly unsettles us. And even if we thrive, because there are people that thrive on change, I would probably class myself as one of those, I still sometimes feel less secure and lack confidence when I'm embracing something completely new. So when you look at a team, and if you're looking at completely transforming the business and the way in which you operate, it always has an element, even if done extremely well with engaging the full team at every step of the way, in having open and honest conversations, in timing it right, there will still be people that, just struggle with change, full stop. Now, what happens when you haven't got a practice manager, in my experience, is that actually what business owners do is they're like, quick, I've got no time, I've got that idea, quick, implement. Okay, I implemented this of tomorrow. It hasn't been thought out, it hasn't been properly communicated, we haven't got half of the stuff that we need to actually make it work properly. The team is struggling, both in terms of feeling secure in the situation and how to make it work, and it just becomes a complete nightmare. The team is frustrated, the project isn't working, the outcomes are not what they were meant to be, and the business owner is frustrated because it was a great idea. It just hasn't worked, or it isn't working. And why isn't it working when it's a great idea? And typically it's because implementation hasn't been done, properly.
Yeah.
So there is this thing of capacity for change, and it's a psychological curve, which actually we map RIE Solutions timeline of resolving, implementing, and then enjoying onto. That the closer we get to implementation, the more our enjoyability levels of work tend to drop, because the discomfort starts creeping in, like, oh, I'm not sure how to do it, I can't remember how to make that system work, or
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in that field. I feel a little bit, if you ask an advisor to start running a meeting in a different way, they might again feel uncomfortable because they've never done it before. So making sure that you don't keep people constantly in that change curve where they are constantly in the implementation mode is important. And that's one of the things that, the practice manager is there to oversee and guard, and to make sure that the team is doing well, and that they're happy, thriving, rather than constantly feeling like, there is something happening and they are not sure what's going on.
Yeah. Great stuff. Glad we've clarified that, because yeah, I love the idea behind that curve actually. I've never actually heard of that before, but certainly true. It's weird as well because everyone has a different personality with it. Because I kind of on the other side, there's the idea of, perfection. If you want something to be perfect, it kind of delays you getting there. So I don't think in this case we're looking for perfection. We're just looking for kind of efficiency of implementation. So, there's definitely an extent to this, where you go too far and not plan too much, but you wait too much to plan, and then the implementation is just, it never really gets off the ground because you just want it to be so perfect. So there's a happy balance and a happy medium between the two, I think. But certainly
Absolutely.
I would agree. Yeah.
Absolutely. My husband always says to me that the perfection is the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
And I think that that is absolutely true. So there is a fine balance. And again, this is where the dynamic between the practice manager and the business owner is great, because the business owner will have the tendency to want to do things as of yesterday. So they're like, brilliant, it's done. And like, I want it done as of yesterday. The practice manager by nature tends to be far more cautious, and they're like, no, 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 we need a year, to get that right. So by having these discussions, by working together, actually, they really find the right middle point that works for everyone. And that's why diversity on the team is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Compromise. Yeah, definitely. Um, I want to talk about something that we kind of touched on before, which is the managing people element of all of this. And thank goodness we are seeing a massive increase in firms, financial planning firms, taking culture very seriously. I don't think everyone is, but we're never going to get to 100% of people to take this stuff seriously. But I'm so glad to see people actually taking it seriously, nowadays, moving away from this idea that, a good culture for our generation means having bean bags in the office and a coffee machine and, a regular food truck that comes by and all that, all these little tiny perks like apps that give you 10% off and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they sound brilliant and the intention is good, but I think it's almost gone too far and we've forgotten what culture actually means, which is just, a rewarding, challenging workplace to be in, that where you're happy. But like when you think of financial planning firms, distinctly, what would you say good culture in a financial planning business looks like? From all those businesses that you've worked with, which ones have been ones with the best culture?
So I think that, to me, and I'm sure that people have slightly different viewpoints on that, but to me, it really comes to the culture is not something that you can define in your brochure or on your website and be like, oh, that's the culture that we have and this is what it is.
Yeah.
Culture is defined by the people in your business. Your team creates your culture, and I genuinely believe that the starting point is always the leadership team. So the leaders have to lead by example. If I want to see collaboration. And I think that, again, the top businesses they've seen are those that have a genuine culture of collaboration and engagement and involvement, and having this trust in open feedback and dialogue. But that doesn't happen unless you've got amazing leaders in the leadership team that are encouraging and demonstrating those types of qualities. So, it's easy to have it, oh, it's one of my values, oh, collaboration is one of my values. But then when it comes to decision making, it's either my way or the highway.
Yeah.
And, we're not going to be chatting about it. And there is no forum for a discussion. There is no opportunity for me to raise concerns that I may have about the decisions that is being made. So I think that, to me, the top firms that I see out there that have a genuine culture are those where leaders are amazing and lead by example. Feedback is something that is encouraged, but there is psychological safety that allows individuals to provide that feedback. There is no point in me asking you what you think if I don't want to hear it, and I'm going to ignore it, or you're going to get yourself into trouble by sharing your thoughts. I mean, it just doesn't work. So that psychological safety and having platforms and opportunities for people to verbalize things, even if they will be uncomfortable, this is something that allows growth and transformation. It's not about having a crowd of people that are sort of like yes people. It's a crowd of people that are going to make logical arguments and cases for what they believe in, that is either the right or the wrong thing to do. And the more I can create in a way of opportunity for those conversations to happen, I think, the better. The whole side of benefits and, I don't know, bring your dog to work and, paying for private medical, these are all really lovely things to have. But if there is a toxic environment, if there is plenty of politics, if I feel that I can never say anything, that is never going to create a conducive working environment to something that is truly, truly amazing. So I think that, there needs to be trust that that is the foundation for everyone to base their relationships in. And then I always believe that, it trickles down. So if there is something happening in the leadership team that isn't optimal, you see it further down in the team dynamics, in the outcomes for clients. It always trickles down. And in the same way, if you've got really fantastic leaders, you tend to see that they have fantastic teams that are working with them, because they see the team as an extension of themselves and, as individuals that truly bring value. And then the final thing that I would sort of say that sort of taps into culture slash, happy working environments is that when I'm interviewing, sometimes I interview people for roles with my clients. Often the reason for people looking to move employment will be lack of acknowledgement, and that acknowledgement doesn't necessarily always mean monetary terms. More often than not, it's actually someone saying, great work, you've done really, really well. And I think that is, really, really a really important factor and part of the culture, gratitude and recognition, celebrating success. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. Positive reinforcement. That's the whole
Absolutely.
idea. And if I think of all of those things that you just mentioned there, I want to give a shout out to a firm. If I can mention them by name, I will mention them by name. And we've already had them on our podcast anyways, but the guys in at Emery Little, who's a firm in London. We've had Becca, their operations director, on the podcast in the last few months, and everything you've just described there is in that business. And as a result, the outcomes for clients are ridiculously good. The outcomes for the team, every time I've seen them, they seem happy, they seem engaged, they seem like they've got a good, kind of, they associate themselves with each other very, very strongly. And there, I would say that all of those things you mentioned there are kind of the hygiene factors, are the things that you want to absolutely, they have to be there in order to make your team happy. the other stuff that we mentioned, like you mentioned, the stuff about bringing your dog to work and the bean bags and the coffee machines and all that kind of stuff, they are perks that can be earned following, successful, rewarding things that have happened. And it sounds really simple to get right in theory. It's not simple at all. And I also
Absolutely.
think it does have something to do with hiring as well. I think that's maybe one thing we haven't just mentioned there is good hiring comes into this, because if you upset that culture that your team creates with one person who doesn't fit that culture, that can have a huge impact on it. So it's about making sure
Absolutely.
that when you are hiring, you are very, 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 very clear on who that right person is, and making sure that the right person, in inverted commas, understands what the culture actually means and how they can fit into that. And I think that's very, very crucial.
Absolutely. So sorry, Dan, you're making sort of, in many ways the case for me. So thank you, because both Becca and Joe, who's the MD,
Mm,
are just fantastic leaders.
yeah,
And, those qualities that we were discussing and mentioning, they embody them and they really live by them. And therefore, this is exactly what is happening within their business,
yeah,
which is always wonderful to see. So we're fortunate enough, to work with several businesses that do that, and to see everyone thrive in them. But you're absolutely right. Hiring is critical, and making sure that you continue to build the team that believes and shares your purpose, your mission, your values is absolutely critical.
yeah. And we mentioned positive reinforcement. The other side, the dark side, if we say, of this kind of area, is something which does rear its head, and I've seen it in person, and it's not nice. And it's the negative reinforcement side, which is something we can characterize as blame culture, which is poisonous, toxic, awful when it shows in firms, because it reduces happiness, it reduces productivity, all sorts of different things. But it's something that is, it's kind of, I mean, I don't necessarily blame anyone for it, because our profession is very high responsibility, very high pressure, very highly regulated. And as a result, when something goes wrong, like we mentioned before, the mistakes can be costly. And the first kind of human instinct is to find what's to blame or who's to blame. Now that sounds like it's natural, but in reality, it doesn't lead to good outcomes. So, what tips do you have? From those firms that you've worked with, maybe ones that have had blame culture. How do they turn that around? But how do you? What tips do you have on for firms on avoiding that blame culture element in their businesses?
So, first of all, sort of from a big picture perspective, I'm currently reading a book by one of my complete heroes, Jane Goodall, and
Mm,
it's called The Book of Hope. Um, it's about nature. So I'm often inspired by nature and often try to translate things into business terms. But one of the things and one of the quotes that she has in there that relates to actually turning things around from the social perspective and the various environmental challenges that we have is that she says that what it really needs is good governance and honest leadership. And I actually think that exactly the same thing applies to businesses, as well as governmental bodies and institutions. So
mm,
ultimately, anything that we're seeing within the business is down to governance and leadership. So this is where we need to be starting.
mm.
And if we're thinking about good governance, what is good governance? As part of that is having process in place. So we're sort of coming on to where we started. Now, processes, which we've mentioned earlier, one of the advantages of having a process in place is that it should be mapped out in such way that everyone in the organization understands what needs to be done, how, and when.
Mm.
When that is in place, there shouldn't be such thing of, oh, I thought, I didn't know, he's done that, I've done that. It's just much more straightforward if we all understand what needs to happen and we're supported in that. The other element that really needs to happen is rather than being stuck in the culture of we have to get it right and it has to be perfect and we can never make a mistake, is to embrace a different attitude to it, and is to say, actually, getting things wrong is okay as long as we learn from it.
Mm.
What's not okay is for us to repeat the same thing over and over again and to expect a different outcome.
Yeah.
So I can really, as a leader, celebrating failure is a great strategy. If you are using it as a strategy to move the business forwards. And now I appreciate that it can be really expensive within the regulated, environment. It can cost money. It can be really unpleasant. So of course, at all costs, it would be great if we can avoid these things from happening, but they
Yeah.
can still happen from time to time. The key is, how do we learn from it, and how do we become stronger, more robust, more efficient, create better outcomes for everyone involved? So I think critical thing is to be spending time together and agreeing how we're working, how we're operating. When the challenge comes, forget about, who's done, who said, who did. Get to the root cause of the problem. What is the problem there? Lack of training,
Yeah.
lack of clarity, lack of person accountable for the task. The problem isn't that it happened. That's not the problem. The problem will be something completely different. So rather than focusing on the symptom, you need to get to the root cause of the problem. And the only way that you're going to do it is by asking repeatedly, how did it happen? Why? Why? Why?
Mm.
And there is a great exercise. It's called Five Whys. So let's just say, I don't know, we didn't get a report on time, and client emails to say, hey, where is it? What happened? I've seen you a month ago, nothing happened. So if I ask my first why, it will be like, well, because Joe didn't do it, and if I get stuck on it, that takes me nowhere. But if I continue to draw deeper and I go, okay, so why didn't Joe do that? Joe didn't do it because it wasn't in her tasks. But why? Why wasn't it in the tasks? Well, because actually it was in different tasks and it's not centrally monitored. And so by asking myself 5 times why that happened, I can get to the real answer.
Yeah.
And then once I know what the problem is, I can address it. And rather, again, don't spend your energy on blaming, spend your energy on building, on creating, on rectifying, on transforming. So I would be highly recommending, good governance and honest leadership combined with let's get the 5 whys exercise done and let's celebrate failure so that we can transform the business. Obviously having clear roles and accountabilities, having structures in place, having task management systems, all of these things are going to help. But this is all good governance.
Yeah.
So I hope it sort of helps people.
It's kind of it fits lovely into a book that I recently read, which was recommended to us by a previous guest called Andrew, and it's called Extreme Accountability, and I think it's by one of the I think he was might have been a Navy SEAL. I can't remember the author, unfortunately. But the idea is that once you realize that everything that comes across you in daily life is your responsibility and you're accountable for that in some way, shape, or form. Once you realize that, the kind of desire to blame other people when something goes wrong just kind of disappears, because instead of thinking, well, what did they do that caused that problem, you think, what could I have done to do that better? And it's just such a refreshing way to look at life, and everything that you've just mentioned there kind of fits into that. It's the idea that, rather than blaming one of the employees for doing it, is it actually the firm's fault, or is it actually again, this is kind of coming down to, is it anyone's fault? You don't look at fault, you look at the solution rather than the symptom. But you know,
Exactly.
it's got a lot more to it than just simply blaming and kind of scapegoating one person when something goes wrong. So
Absolutely.
completely
It
agree
gets
with
you nowhere. It's a waste of time and energy. So,
you.
yeah.
I agree.
And if you made a bad decision, you've got the wrong team member, again, it comes back to good governance and great leadership.
Just yeah,
This is what it is.
yeah. So I think it also comes down to something I want to talk about very, very quickly because we are getting I'm wary of how much your time I'm taking up today. But one of the good things, one of the kind of top qualities of a good practice manager, as we've probably realized today, is being very well organized. And being well organized is, I think it's a personality trait. I don't think everyone is by nature well organized. I think some people are to begin with, and some people aren't. But I think everyone potentially can, not everyone, but a lot of people can be organized if they have kind of certain techniques and things that they follow. So what tips do you have, just very quickly, for our audience on being more organized? What things do you use to become more organized?
Okay, so that's, I think, hopefully an easy one. Number one, capacity calculations. I love my capacity calculator. I live by it. I use it annually, so that I can preempt any challenges that I'm going to run into. I use it with every single client, and I have a master practitioner's organizer that has a capacity calculator in it. So the idea is that you calculate your capacity for work for the year so that you know if you're going to have challenges. And that, entails, we've got a blog on that if anyone wants more information, again, conscious of time, but it takes into account, the number of days that you are working, and then variety of tasks that you're performing within the business, and the number of time that goes to it. The two tasks that are always astounding in the number of days per year that they take is email and internal meetings. I guarantee that at least a third of your year will go to each. So, like if you've got 6 months of that or 7 months of that, this is not unusual, but you're probably unaware of it. You only see it once you do your capacity calculations. So it's an important task, I believe, to undertake to keep yourself organized. Number two, having a strict structure to your calendar. So designating days to specific types of tasks. Otherwise, again, you will be another person working in the business and not on the business. You will dragged in into all sorts of different things that are happening and never get project work done, never get tasks done that you really need to be getting done. So I can guarantee that because I have those conversations with practice managers on a daily basis. It happens. And the only way to sort of prevent it is to ensure that you are providing team with access to yourself, but that you're also providing, allocating time to compliance, allocating time to project work, etc., to make sure that you get through other things. The third thing that I'd say is, it's a very simple tip, is every day that you start the day to decide what's my top priority for the day that I absolutely have to do. Okay, it's not 5 tasks that you need to do, it's not 10 tasks that you need to do. What is the one thing that you have to do no matter what happens? And make sure that you carve out time to actually do it. I know that it can be very tempting to do 5 things at once. It is counterproductive, in case you are not aware of it yet. So eliminating distractions is very important. And it can, distractions can take a variety of forms. It can be team having constant access to you, could be your emails. So one of the tips for me would be that you structure access to email time so that you're not constantly in your inbox. The wastage that you create, is just, again, incredible by ping-ponging with people, by checking the emails, getting distracted, not finishing what you were doing. So just don't be in your inbox. It's very simple solution. I think that having an electronic task management system is very, very important, and
Yeah.
having central locations for your projects, for your tasks, so that you know exactly what needs to be done and when. You know, color coding your calendar can be super useful so that you can really easily see what's happening, what's planned. Scheduling things way in advance, you know, so for example, I don't know, your team appraisals, your compliance calendar, you don't need to, you know, you can schedule it easily for 12 months ahead. You know, I do it
Yeah.
all the time. You can see Dan smiling, but like I love planning ahead. So I think
Yeah.
that, you know, it's a great way of getting yourself out of trouble and being
It's
conservative. You know, it's very easy to say, yes, 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 I'm going to do it all. I'm a superstar, I'm a superhero, and burn out. Actually being realistic and knowing when to say no, knowing when to delegate. You know, you're not meant to fix every problem. You're meant to coordinate that these things happen, but it doesn't mean I need to DIY it
yeah.
every single time. Quite the contrary. I've got, you know, lots of people working with me that can help out and, you know, that I'm trying to cultivate as next leaders. So I would say that these are probably good tons more, but I think that these are
Yeah, I
probably
can
the
imagine.
critical ones that I'd go with to begin with.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to your planning very far in advance thing because I think I'm booked into a webinar with the Master Practitioners Club for next April or something like that, and you know that goes way beyond how we would normally plan things. But yeah, I agree, and it does work. It works. It definitely does. So really, really great tips. Final few questions then, just before we finish. So we always like to
Sure.
ask everyone this big question because most of the people who come on our podcast work in the financial planning profession. And if we think, I always say that if we think back to what it looked like 10 years ago, and if you, Domi, think what it looked like 10 years ago, it looks very different to how it does today. But I'm interested 10 years time. We've probably got a webinar booked in 10 years time, haven't we?
Yep,
What do
planned
you
ahead.
what are you most excited to see over those 10 years? Like, what are you really excited about at the moment in our profession that you think will really make a difference over the next 10 years?
So, you know, I think that we've been talking about technology for many years now, you know, how technology is going to transform the face of financial planning and financial services. But I generally believe that we're much closer to that. And I'm really excited to see how Generation Z, so, you know, the digital generation, is going to influence the way that financial planning works and the way that it is undertaken and how technology is going to be used to help facilitate that. It's really, we're just, you know, we're now in that era or in that time. So Generation Z, I think, would be classed as anyone now between 30 and 12, I think, you know. So like those that are
That's
30, you
I
know,
think
they
I'm in
might be
that
now
group.
starting, you know, their businesses. And there we go. That's a great example, Dan, you know, because just think about the types of things that you are doing and how you are thinking about approaching marketing
Hmm.
and helping businesses with engagement with social media and thinking about, you know, how to put together terms of business so that it's actually a legible document that, you know, I can look at and feel vaguely excited about, you know, because at least it looks good. So and we've got the 12-year-olds that obviously, you know, will become the 22-year-olds, and that's a
Yeah.
completely different, that will be a completely different and new outlook. And I'm really excited because I think that a lot of change is going to come as a result of this Generation Z sort of maturing and bringing that completely different outlook to financial services and financial planning. And I believe that over the next 10 years, we're really going to start seeing the impact and influence of it,
Yeah.
which, you know, is just beginning to start. It's not quite there, but 10 years is a long span. You know, even if you think about what happened within the last five, like things changed a lot.
Hmm.
So I'm very excited. I think that,
Good.
you know, technology is going to play a big part in that. It's not going to, by any means, you know, remove human input or the importance of human beings. But I think that a lot of efficiencies and, you know, slickness and different form of engagement and different form of engagement with financial decision making will be also expected from the end users as we're engaging more with technology, and we're becoming more competent using apps and looking at things. I think that it will really change the face of how things work.
It's good. Yeah, and scalability comes into it. I mean, you mentioned there about like 12-year-olds, and it really, really does make me feel old when like I see 12-year-old TikTok stars with like billions and millions and millions of followers. Like they are already ridiculously good content creators. So I can't imagine what they're going to be like in 10 years' time. Scary. It's very, very scary to think of. But like you said, optimistic, really, really exciting to think about as well. It's a good one. I love asking that question. This next question I also love asking because I mean I'm not really much of a reader, but I know that our audience are, and we always get great books recommended. So we always like to ask our guests for a book that has helped them in their career so far and has really kind of affected the way that they think about things. It doesn't have to be a book; it can be any piece of content. But what would you say? What have you got for us and would recommend to our audience?
Okay, so I'm really sorry. I recommend more than one, okay? Because I think that the first one, and I genuinely believe that it's a book that most probably of our listeners have already read, but it's just so impactful in terms of the structure that explains for running a business. And that's Traction. Traction, Get a Grip on Your Business by Gino Wickman. I think that it's a fantastic book and one that definitely influenced me as an individual, me as a business person, me as a business owner, and what I believe a good structure looks like for keeping the business on track. So, that's one that I'd imagine most people are familiar with, but it just continues to be a really sort of strong book in terms of impact on the business. So if you haven't read it yet, do. If you read it and you're not doing it, I suggest you go back to reading it again. Um, but I think, again, going back to this notion that is currently in my head related to good governance and leadership being a really, really important aspect in running a successful organization. There's a brilliant book by Anthony Gell called Leadership. As you can see, there's several thoughts that I like of his
So
that have
for
been
the
tagged.
For the record and for the podcast listeners, Domi's holding it up and it's got loads of sticky notes in it because she loves it so much.
So the full title is Leadership, How to Get Yourself, Your Team, and Your Organization Further Than You Ever Thought Possible. And it's just riddled with fantastic ideas. So I love that book. One of my favorite quotes comes from that book, and that is that recognition is like vitamin C. You have to give it out every day. And it goes back to the culture that we're discussing. I think that it's fantastic. And then the final book, I promise, is the last thing I'm going to say, is the book that I've mentioned earlier. So I'm holding it up again by my hero, Jane Goodall, co-written with Douglas Abrams and Gail Hudson. And that's a book of hope. It's just a great read, even though it's not a business book. It's definitely not a financial planning book. I always think that you find inspiration in anything that you read, that it has a wider context. And for us as a business, one of our mission is to try to live the world a better place than we found it. So we really try to live by our mission and the values that we have. And again, Jane gave us some great ideas. She was talking about microloans. I started looking into that, seeing how we could incorporate that into something that, we do. So I just always think that there are ideas everywhere if you are, open to read books and learn new things.
Good stuff. 3 for the price of 1. And I don't think any of those have ever been recommended on our podcast as well. So 3 brand new ones. Absolutely awesome. So I think we should probably draw to a close because it's now over an hour. We really appreciate everyone listening, of course, if you're still at this point. Thank you so much, Domi. That was a really, really good conversation. We do like to give the last word to our guests to say a big thank you for coming on. So can you tell our audience how to find you, where to connect with you, and leave us with any last words as well?
Sure, feel free to drop me a line at any point. So you can find us on RIE.Solutions. And in the same way, you can drop me a line by emailing Dominika. So that's Nika at rie.solutions. Yeah, feel free to get in touch via the website or sending us a note. We would love to hear from you.
It's really good. The nerdy side of me is absolutely overwhelmed the fact that there's an actual .solutions domain as well. I love that. That works very well with your name, doesn't it? Fantastic. Rather than just riesolutions.co.uk, you've got rie.solutions. I love it.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Domi, for joining us on today's show. So that was Dominika Sieradzka-MacCuirc on the NextGen Planners podcast. If you enjoyed this
Thank
podcast, you
you.
can, of course, share it with anyone, friends, colleagues, family, whoever. And it's available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our website, www.nextgenplanners.co.uk. Unfortunately, there isn't a .planners domain name, as much as I'd love it. And on there, you'll find more information about our training contract, all of the different things that we do here at NextGen, our amazing community, and the conference, which is now live and will be in May and June 2023. So go and check that out. And of course, you can follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I think, yeah, we know we are. We don't really post that much, but we are on there. And of course, if you could just leave us a review, I think we're sat about 41 reviews at the moment, but we really want to push that up. So if you can just give us a 5 out of 5 star review, if you've enjoyed listening today, that would be really, really helpful to us. But for now, thank you very, very much to Domi for joining us on today's show. Thank you guys in the audience for listening, as always. And we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.